All right, guys, it is Monday morning, and I'm sitting here cruising through Wyoming. I just left the house, and just sitting here thinking, and I want to talk about a topic that I briefly touched on before, and that is contract freight versus spot freight. And when we look at the numbers that DAT is reporting, and I haven't looked at the recent data, but this was from several months ago. I don't suspect this changes a whole lot. And that is the delta, or the difference between contract rates and spot rates. So right now in flatbed, well, I don't know about right now, like I said, a couple of months ago in flatbed, contract rates paid on average nationwide 5% higher than spot market rates. So 5%, so that would look like 5% of $2 a mile would be 10 cents, right? So if we're getting $2 a mile in spot, we can hope to get $2.10 in contract, or something similar to that. Right now, spot rates are $2.07, so very, very near that. So you should be about $2.20 in contract rates nationwide. So what and that's a little different because we've had such a depressed market for so many years. Contract rates have slowly come down to start to come in line with spot, and that's what we see. Because I don't know what it used to be 3 years ago. It probably used to be quite a bit higher than 5%. But this year it's 5% higher than spot rates. So of course, throughout the lanes it changes, right? One lane might have 20% higher contract rates than spot rates in that same lane, and then another lane might be vice versa and have contract might actually be lower than spot. You guys understand how averages work, so I'm not going to go into detail on that. But so then there was another article that I looked at. I think it was FreightWaves. This was a while ago though, and they had done a survey with all of the shippers. Well, not all, but they didn't say how many shippers. They just did a survey among the shippers, and they asked them a question of, what is your most important metric when you're looking at, I think they used the term RFPs, or looking at bringing on new carriers for your contracts, right? And so they answered that question, and it came out overwhelmingly among the shippers. I don't remember the percentage point. It was like 80%, I want to say. It was the majority of the customers are, as a carrier, our customers, whether it be the shipper, the receiver, whoever's writing the contract, right? Whoever's paying the freight bill. They overwhelmingly answered that question of, this is the number one thing that we look at when hiring a carrier for a contract. And the ironic thing about that is that same thing that they said was their number one thing they look at to make a decision on who gets this contract, was the thing that most carriers, I shouldn't say most, every single carrier is looking at in their numbers as something not to do. Right? Every single trucking company out there has, big companies probably have whole staffs of people to try to figure out how they can not do this one thing that every one of their customers is begging for them to do. Right? So we have shippers and we have carriers misaligned on their values, because the shippers want one thing to occur. They want their carriers to supply one service to them. Overwhelmingly. And the carriers have a whole office building of people trying to brainstorm and figure out how they can not do this one thing. In other words, the carrier is saying not no to that one thing, but hell no. I bet you can't guess what that one thing is. The shippers answered the question that overwhelmingly their most important metric when giving out contracts is price. And carriers have whole teams of people to try to figure out how they can get more money. I guess theoretically they are aligned on the same issue. It's just in the opposite direction, right? Carriers are trying to figure out how they can get more price. Shippers are trying to figure out how they can pay less to the carriers. And so what ends up happening because of that phenomenon that, you know, a big surprise, right? Shippers want to move freight for less. Wow, really? Can't believe that. But because of that, unless you come in at the lowest price, unless you're the lowest bidder, you're probably not going to get the contract. And if you do get the contract and someone else comes in under you later on, you'll lose your contract. Because the shippers didn't answer the question. Their number one concern was making sure they make deliveries on time. They didn't answer the question to make, oh, we want to make sure that we have quality drivers picking up at our facilities. That's not the question. That's not what they answered. They didn't answer, oh, we want to make sure the carrier has a good safety record. All those things I'm sure come into play, but their number one was price. So you might think you got a good contract. You might go and do a bunch of work, spend weeks, crunching numbers and come in at, a good price for you and bid out a contract for a year with a shipper. And 3 months into that contract, some carrier comes in at a much lower price than you do. Because one thing you can guarantee, these shippers, your customer is getting 3 to 7 calls a day from brokers and other carriers trying to get your freight. We know this. This is a known thing. These people or these departments that run the freight department at a particular place that are responsible for awarding contract, they're getting called over and over and over again to the point where it's annoying with, we've got this sort of deal for you. We've got the best trucks. We've got the best drivers. A bunch of smoke being blown up everybody's skirt when it comes to getting contracts, right? You promise the world. Every company does. Even the company that has a horrible safety record, nobody in the company can speak English. They hire that one American to go get contracts, sales guy, and they promise the world. Why wouldn't they? They have to. And they come in significantly less than you do on price. Guess whose contract's getting canceled 3 months in, even though it was a year-long contract? You are. So unless you're willing to continually lower your price on your contract, you will constantly lose contracts. Because your customer, they're telling us through this report, these are our customers, right? And they are answering the survey that their number one metric is price. So if we want to hold that contract, we better come in at a good price. Well, that is the very thing that every trucking company is trying not to do. Right? We're trying not to come in at a good price. We're trying to come in at a high price. We're trying to point to all the services that we might provide to justify our high price. Meanwhile, the shippers are telling us we don't care about all that stuff. We care about price. So, again, guys, if you guys listen to any other of my videos, you kind of know that I'm a spot market guy. And, as much as I would love to get contracts, I understand that what's going on right now. And I don't see the contract world being a valid option because of all that stuff I just talked about. You might go and spend a bunch of time getting a contract, and then 3 months in, you think you're doing great, and then your contract gets canceled. The other thing, even let's say we hit the average and we get contracts at 5% over spot. Because here's the thing: if you go and bid 15% over spot, 10% over spot, guess what? You did not accomplish. You did not accomplish what your customer wanted you to accomplish, which is come in at the low price. So as soon as you go and bid a contract that starts to look attractive to you, it's a contract that you're not going to hold for long, right? But let's say you go and you bid out that contract. Most trucking companies, large trucking companies who have a lot of contracts, they don't have 100% contract freight, meaning only about 60% of their freight that they haul is under contract. The rest is spot, because they have to fill in with spot to connect the dots, right? They can't get contract freight from point A to point B, and then contract freight from point B to point C, and then contract freight back from C back to A. So they'll always fill in with spot freight. And I don't know the full percentage, and every trucking company is different. There probably is a few trucking companies that have very near 100% contract freight, but the majority don't. 60, 80%, 70%, I don't know what the number is. Sometimes 50% only contract freight and 50% spot. So let's assume you did the average and you hit the 5% number because you're scared to bid over that, because if you bid over that, you're not going to hold your contract for long. And then you hit the 50, just for easy math, you hit the 50-50 mark. 50% spot, 50% contract. Well, you haven't really increased your numbers a whole lot, right? Because when you end up getting 5% better rates for 50% of your miles, well, you've really only gained 2.5% over spot market. Now, we should always look to gain everything we can. So I'm not saying that's not a valid gain. That is a valid gain. But is it really worth all the headache of going out and getting and holding that customer and stressing out about, what do I do when this lane cancels, when this contract cancels and someone beats my price? Now I have to change all my drivers. I have to change, I have to change my whole business operation because this one lane canceled overnight, right? We're picking up 3 or 4 loads a week from this customer. All of a sudden he calls us, hey, no more loads. What do you mean no more loads? All freight dried up. No, it didn't. Well, we found a cheaper carrier and we don't want to tell you what's going on. So freight dried up. We don't have any loads. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm a little skewed in my opinion in this topic, because I just don't see any value in getting contracts. I don't know why. I just don't see the value in that, because it seems like as soon as you spend a bunch of time, energy, and effort to go out and get that contract, change your operations to run that contract, then it's just going to cancel. And you're not in control as the owner of your company. You're not in control with your revenue. Your customer's in control, and eventually he's going to say no more. And then you're sent scrambling with however many drivers and trucks you have at the time, scrambling to try to find out, how do we keep our drivers fed, right? How do we not lose money when we're dealing with a market that is extremely tight? And so I guess it all depends on, can you find that one customer that is loyal? Can you find that one customer that doesn't rank price as their number one metric? And if you can find that contract, then this whole topic might be bullshit, right? Because no, we found the one company that this stuff doesn't apply to. But a huge majority of our customers, as a carrier, answered that question, that they don't care as much about all the other metrics as they care about price. So that puts us at a spot where we now have to go and find that one-off customer that answered the survey the other direction, right? Or we just go run spot. And once you get, and I do believe this is true, when you are a one truck carrier, you really don't even have contract in the equation, right? I mean, there's just no point, because getting 5% better for that one lane, how many loads are we actually going to haul out of that one contract, right? You go get a contract, and how many loads are you going to actually haul a month? And then the 5% better, is that any, what are we really accomplishing? When you start getting 20 or 30 trucks, then the question is a lot different, right? Then we actually have, first of all, we have a lot more contracts available to us because we have a higher capacity level. But as a one truck owner operator or two truck company like me, we have very, very few contracts even on the table, because for my company, I live in Wyoming and Jeff lives in Idaho. Well, where in the hell are we going to take on a contract where we can get our drivers home weekly and move a contract? So the only contract we might be able to take on is a contract where we have one load a month, effectively, right? And then one load a month at 5% better than spot is whoop-de-flip-and-do. It's not worth my brain energy to even go bid that lane out, right? So I don't know, that's the way I view it. For small carriers like me, I'm not really sure that the contract is a valid option. The other thing that we see going on over the last several years is that all of these freight professionals, shippers, receivers, anybody who's paying for freight, and also brokers who are the middlemen between the shipper and the carrier. Everybody has been reporting that the shippers are trying to automate more of this, right? They're all moving away from relationships and moving into automation. Of course, relationships are still a big part of this whole scenario, but my point is that load boards are growing pretty quickly over the years. Used to be load boards had a very small percentage of the actual amount of freight moved in the country. That number continually goes up and up and up and up and up, because I don't mean that more freight is being moved in our country. I mean more of the freight being moved is going to the spot market as a percentage, and going to the load board, because all the technologies around the load board, all the technologies that brokers use to move this freight is getting better. Therefore, spot market, brokers and carriers can supply a pretty good service to a customer, and there's no reason to put that lane up for contract when they can get their lane moved quickly, efficiently through a brokerage who puts their loads on a load board, right? Or might have a network of carriers that they call directly. Either way, it's still spot market. Doesn't matter how the broker finds the carrier, whether he, knows the number of, knows my number and calls me directly and says, hey, I got a load of this, you want it? Yeah, sure, I'll take it. That's spot market freight. If he posts it on the load board and I call the same broker, say, hey, I'd like to move this load, that's spot market freight, right? It's not contractual freight. Now, the broker might have a contract with his customer to move 5 loads a week, right? So it's contractual freight on that end, but the broker might move that on the spot market, and that seems to be increasing. I don't know what the number is. I think in dry van, it's 20% of all freight moves on the spot market. So 80% moves under contract, which is still a huge percentage, right? In flatbed, I think it's 60, so 60-40. So 40% moves on the spot market, and 60% move under contract. So still a majority of your freight moves under contract. But that number keeps increasing. So the 20% that moves, van in the spot market, 10 years ago was probably 15% or 10% or whatever, right? I don't know what that number is, but that is being reported as the percentage of freight being moved spot is increasing, has been increasing, and is still increasing. So spot market freight is starting to become more and more feasible to run a business on, I guess is what I'm getting at. And so anyway, that is my opinion on spot versus contract. Now, when we go into dry van, it gets a little bit different. Dry van has a 10% higher rate in contract over spot. So that starts to make dry van contracts a lot more attractive. In the flatbed market, I'm just going to go out and say it. I don't think contract freight in flatbed is all that attractive. At a 5% better, and all the crap we've got to deal with contracts, getting trucks back, or we're going to get docked, or all the crap, or we got to have a driver take a day off, and now what do we do? Crap, we've got to go, I don't know what we do. We got to hire more drivers to make sure drivers can get days off, which then makes drivers' pay not as good, right? When we have to have drivers sitting around waiting for freight because we've over-hired drivers for that lane, because we had to over-hire drivers because we need to give drivers days off, right? If we need to give a driver, 4 or 5 days off in a row, then we have to over-hire for that lane, which means when every driver's working and nobody has a day off, drivers are sitting around waiting on freight. So that doesn't work well for drivers. When they're working, they want to work hard, and then they want to go home and play with their family and kids or whatever, right? So anyway, in the dry van market, the contract rates are still at a level where I think it's feasible. It becomes more attractive, and also the rates generally are lower. So every benefit we can get is a huge gain, right? You might look at spot market van and be like, this is unsustainable. Contract freight, okay, we can make 5% per mile profit. But in the spot market, we might lose 2 cents per mile. So it becomes absolutely critical that you get contracts. Or you just close up your business right now. So in the van market, I think that whole idea that I just talked about gets flipped. But in the spot market, flatbed, I think that contract rates just become not really all that attractive, And mainly I'm kind of saying this because a lot of people get this idea that, I'm just going to go get a contract because that's where the money's at. Not according to the numbers, not according to the data. 5% better. Whoop-de-flip-and-do, right? And it's not 5% better because it's only 5% better if you had contract freight both directions, which is nearly impossible. Not even the big companies can accomplish that. So the 5% gets cut in half at best. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think. Do you guys disagree with me? Do you think that contract freight is absolutely attractive and needs to be part of the equation? Or do you think that there might be something to that with small companies like mine, small carriers, one truck owner operators, whatever, it might be more feasible and possibly even more profitable just to stay in the spot market and stay very mobile. Because one nice thing about, I was getting ready to end, but I guess I'll close with this, is one nice thing about the spot market is you can stay very, very flexible. During the seasons, you can go to where the hot market is, right? In contract, assuming you have a year-long contract, you might have a year-long contract that looks good, but then your backhaul, your 50% spot market back, depending on the season, it might completely dry up and volumes go back to where you can't find a load back, or the rates just suffer and half the year you're running at a loss on the way back. And then that 5% gain that you might have gotten looks like a 5% loss. You'd be better off going spot and just staying in a different part of the country, because that's where that season has good freight. So spot market carriers, especially one truck owner operators, can be very, very mobile, very, very flexible. They can know exactly where they need to be, what season they need to be there, and always have paying freight on the trailer, because they know their numbers, they know what they're doing, they know where, this part of the country, this time of year, has good paying freight. I'm going to hang out over here. Then it dries up, and I'm going to move to this side of the country, because now there's a seasonal something going on over here. So let me know what you guys think. I'm a little bit unsure whether that thought process is correct, because there's so many people that are say the opposite to that, what I just said. So let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? Do you think I'm onto something, or do you think that's total bullshit?